Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn even more money. All in one place, and it's for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup looks like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts, Q&A, and polls has let us be creative on a whole other level. I highly recommend you give it a try. So download Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome back, Exes and T podcast fans. Hey, it's Danny here, you guys. Welcome back. I'm really excited to have you guys here. Thank you for joining me. And I'm starting to sound like your regular average podcaster, you guys. This is great. But I just want to thank everybody for coming back. Everybody who has tuned into the podcast, who has been regular listeners, sharing, coming on and sharing your stories, just all of the words of wisdom and support that I've received. I cannot thank you guys enough. Your guys' support is what really helps me to be able to bring guests on. And a lot of the times, too, you guys sharing your stories will encourage somebody else to want to share theirs. And anybody who's come to me and haven't shared their story, hey, I really appreciate you just wanting to come and talk because I love to talk about this stuff. So, with that being said, you guys, we're back at it again with another episode about Amway. But the cool thing about this is that we're not talking about the typical Brit Worldwide or WWDB. We actually have another fantastic insight of what it was like to have been in LTD, Leadership Team Development. So, before we get started, of course, we have to go through all of the disclaimers. I and my guests are speaking on personal opinions based on personal experiences. Nobody is here to defame Amway or LTD, URA, Worldwide, doesn't matter. We're just here speaking our truth. So if you want to join one of these organizations, you're an adult, go ahead and make your own decision. I would highly encourage you to listen to some of the stories that are being expressed. Maybe you'll make a different decision. That's not up to me, that's up to you. So, with that being said, you guys, I have an awesome guy named Steven who is here to tell us what life was like in LTD. Thank you so much, Steven, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, how did you find me? How did you find the X's and T podcast?
I found you on Spotify. I'd been kind of on this kick of looking at different podcasts from people who were former MLM. I wanted to kind of compare my own experience to other people's. And your channel in particular, you had a lot of episodes about Amway and Worldwide Dream Builders. And I just kept listening to one after another, and all the different stories were really interesting. And the more I listened, the more I could relate to certain things. And it would jog my memory a bit too, just to say, hey, I remember this happened to me as well. And it was just a good way to really deconstruct the whole process of leaving and life after Amway and what I really went through. And it's just been a really good listen. So been a follower ever since.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I also kind of got started that same way where, you kind of go and you find one maybe YouTube episode and then it leads to a podcast and getting to hear specifically about Amway. Like I don't know if it fuels the fire for me, but it definitely kind of adds to that. Like I really went through this and other people did too. And have you had an opportunity to listen to Roberta Blevins' Life After MLM, her Amway Tools episodes?
Yeah, I actually have. There was one really good one where there was a guy who got like pretty high up in Amway, and just hearing his perspective, because it's good to hear all stories, of course. When you hear a story of somebody who was very far into the organization, they're at these high pin levels, it's just interesting to get their perspective and what made them leave and all that. So hearing the inner workings of what goes on just always catches my eye, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm definitely also fascinated by like how when we're in Worldwide or LTD or all these organizations in Amway, like we envision people who are emeralds, like there's no way they would leave. Like what on earth would cause an emerald to leave? They're making so much money. And I think one of the episodes that she has, I think the guy calls himself Steve. He doesn't say which organization he's in, but he reached that emerald level. And he was talking about how he realized that he was making money off of the tools and he didn't realize that. which I
Mhm.
found so fascinating. But speaking of Amway, how did you get involved? Like, where were you at in your life when or I guess when they found you?
Yeah, this was back, I want to say, actually, yeah, November 2018. And how this happened, I mean, the place I was at in life, I was somewhat early into my career. I'm working my IT job at this nonprofit and, doing pretty well for myself. I mean, I could have been doing better, but financially good standing. My student loans were all paid off. I, bought my car in cash and all that. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got a good baseline, but how do I really go from where I am now to really doing better, building generational wealth, having money for a future family, things like that. And around that same time, I meet a mutual friend at church. I was involved in a group where we had college students and we essentially mentor them, help them to navigate that period in life. And one of the other mentors in the same group, we got a chance to connect for a little bit, and he's talking, and he kind of mentions offhand that he's retiring soon. Now I know this guy at the time, he's not even 40 yet. I'm thinking, retire? Like, what are you doing? Like, and he doesn't say too much about it, but he gives me a call later on that Sunday, and we're talking for a bit. And he's like, "Yeah, he's got these mentors that retired in the 20s," and I'm like, "Whoa, retired in the 20s? What is that?" And start talking some more, and that's when we get to the point where we're going through what I now know is called the process, where he essentially dropped that message on me and extended that hand to, "Hey, you can start this process, learn more about my mentors, and kind of qualify yourself to speak to them." I'm thinking, okay, sure, why not? Now, this time I didn't know it was Amway. I didn't know anything about what he was doing. I just knew that he had the result and he knew folks that were apparently pretty successful. So I said, yeah, why not? And we end up sitting down at a Wegmans about a week later, and we kind of do what's I don't know it's called the MG1, and we're just talking about life goals, things like that. I'm like, okay, cool, pretty cool guy. We're just vibing. And then he gives me a book. It's called Business of the 21st Century by Robert Kiyosaki. And so I read through the book.
Yes.
And matter of fact, I was out of town that weekend, but I remember reading the book on the flight on the trip there to Florida, and I came back. And anyway, in the book, they're talking about network marketing, and I knew a little bit about it. And at that point, I got slightly skeptical. I didn't know too much about MLMs, but I knew it was one of those things where people pop in your DMs and they'll ask you, "Hey, do you want to make extra money?" I'm thinking, do I want to do that or not? But I just say, okay, I'll hear them out. I read the book, went back to him, and at that point, we had the second meeting, review the book, and he invites me to this information session. So show up at this pretty fancy hotel. It's like a Marriott in a nice area. Walk in the room. Everyone's dressed super nice. I'm like, wow, this is like a room of diverse young professionals. I'm like, wow, this is like, I think this is one of the things that drew me. Is like, this is a crowd of people that I would want to be around because they all looked, successful. They were going somewhere in life, positive. Uh, End up sitting down in the meeting, and that's when they give the presentation. And he's talking about the different slides, and he reviews everything we read in the book. So it's like, hey, these are the four quadrants, et cetera, et cetera. This is how you would make money passively. And there comes that moment where you're listening, you're kind of vibing to what they're saying, and then that next slide comes, and it's like Amway, and I'm like, I I'd heard about Amway here and there, but I didn't really know what it was, and kind of took that like, I'll talk to my dad about this because I knew that he'd been in Amway before. So my dad was in Amway back in like early mid 2000s, back when it was called Quickstar. So I just had a heart to heart with him, thinking, okay, what was your experience with Amway? Would you recommend this? Because I'm at this point I'm skeptical. And what my dad said that hooked me was that even though he didn't really make a lot of money with Amway, he said that in terms of personal development, it was one of the best things he'd ever done in his life. And I said, okay, so again, financially, not really sure what's going to happen with that, but myself coming from someone that grew up shy, I was afraid to talk to people in some cases. I got voted most quiet in my high school class. I'm thinking, let me try this out. I mean, it may be a fun challenge to learn to talk to folks, things like that. So I go back to, the person that showed me the plan. I said, yeah, let's keep going with the process. And long story short, there's more steps to it. It's a follow up. We saw the information session again, another follow up. Then I had to fill out a 10-question questionnaire, fill that out, send it back to them, and they pretty much give you the what I would call an offer call after that. They say, hey, mentor said your questionnaire checked out, and that's really how I got started. And we kind of went from there.
Wow. I mean, you were already really successful. And like you said, you wanted to try to amplify your life, which is fantastic. And also your dad co-signed it, which I would imagine like adds so much. I know like for me, if my dad co-signed something, I'm like, dope, it's a good idea. Like I can do it. And they really present themselves to be this very successful organization. The people who are there, they want to be taken seriously. They have this process so that way they can seem very, very professional. It's really interesting the way that they do it too. I Until I have left, when I was in, I was like, this is hands down like one of the most professional settings I've ever been in.
Hmm.
And as you are now you join Amway, you get your offer, exciting. What was now the expectation for you to be an IBO?
Yeah, so we had something called the 9 core steps. I know a lot of other organizations have something similar. And what this was, and I kind of had to go through my own notes and check to see what that consisted of. But our steps consisted of things that we do to quote unquote build the business, things that we do for personal growth, and things that we do in terms of associating with members of our team and upline and all that. So when it came to building our business, we were expected to drop the message 3 to 5 times a week for different people. And what that consists of is essentially talking to somebody, especially when you're starting out, talking to somebody in what they call your A and B list. So these are A lists is like your very close friends and family, folks that you could walk into their house and probably open the fridge and grab a snack. Then you've got your B list, which is the people that you haven't talked to in a while, but you kind of know them, you're kind of cool. And essentially going through just that whole list of sending them messages, calling, and trying to get them in front of the business. You had 100% personal use, which was the next one, which is essentially you're spending $300 or more to get 100 PV of products. And for us, it was kind of pitched as a brand switch, which in hindsight, it's really not because they're spending so much more money than you ever would at, say, a Target or whatnot. But just buying things that you might use normally. So vitamins, household products, things like that. You've got the 50 PV customer volume, which was try to get a certain amount of customer sales every month. And in that regard, you had to fudge that a bit because you could try to do it the old fashioned way, but getting customers was pretty difficult. So you at least had to declare that as you put your PV in for each month and make sure that you at least sampled it out and then wrote it off or something like that. You had listened to at least one audio daily, read one chapter of a book. They had a first year book list, so stuff like Think and Grow Rich or Rich Dad Poor Dad, things like that. They want you to read a chapter of that a day. And then you had the association, which was attend pretty much everything. So you had LTD had 4 major conferences per year. You had the big one, which was Summit, which was where you had new diamonds get recognized. You had some smaller conferences, then you had like the winter, spring leadership, things like that. We also had the weekly info session. So that meeting where they show the plan, they had that every Tuesday night. And that also cost about, for that meeting, it was about $5 each week to get in. It was cash only. So there's that. We had a team meeting, which took place about maybe 1 or 2 hours away. And for us, like mainly Virginia or somewhere, but we did that maybe, yeah, once every 2 months. And then we had these things called attitude sessions where a diamond would come in from a different, not different organization, but different team. And it was like, hey, this diamond, like I'm in the DC area. So if a diamond shows up and it's like, hey, he's in Pennsylvania somewhere, it's almost like you're expected to drop everything you're doing and go see this person talk just to get motivated. And there's a cost for that too. I think it was about $20 when that happened. So you can kind of see a pattern of just money dripping out of your pockets every time Amway does something because they want you to get around that. The other parts were be accountable and have integrity. So there's value mentorship and be coachable, and communicate with your LTD messaging apps daily. So all of that was expected just as a regular IBO. And I know in my case, I would even send my upline progress reports, and not because he asked, just to kind of keep myself accountable in that way. It's like, hey, I spoke to this many people today about the business. I did MPA, which is like making somebody aware. I did DTMs. I booked an MG1, sampled a product, read this book, whatever, just as a way to track my own progress. And all of that was what I would consider like what their standard for that. And then you had the financial piece as well. I know we're talking about those LTD apps in particular. You had the messaging app, you had the app for your audios, and standard price for that package. And then again, this is outside of your PV that you're doing, but this package is the first 2 months are free. After that, it goes up to $60 a month, and then after that, it goes up to $80 a month, and that's for app access. And if you want to upgrade, you got the Plus version, which gives you more audios for about 110 or so, I think. And then I know the VIP was 250 for sure. And I think I had VIP for the last year or so. So you get all the audios, but yeah, they charge you quite a bit for that. And that's kind of everything that goes into just what they want with Amway LTD and what they consider a partnership.
Wow. The money piece of this is very like jaw-dropping for me. I think that $5 a week for a meeting, like that adds up so fast.
Oh yeah.
And and cash only. And of course, I'm sure that was the same way at these larger ones that you said were about $20. We had something very similar. We called them rallies. Again, same thing. We paid for those. Always cash too. And during my time in the business, I don't think I ever questioned the fact that it was cash.
Mhm.
Nowadays, I'm like, why only cash? And I just $5 a week. That is a lot.
Yeah.
But I understand too when they're telling you you have to be at these, and it's not. I remember this girl Meredith. She was in Brit Worldwide, and she's like, it was never a large enough amount of money to really question it. I mean, $5 is like what, a Starbucks coffee a week. I'm sure that's how they pitched it.
Right.
Like, so it doesn't sound like a lot, but kind of looking back, I can imagine like, dang, like for these meetings where they're telling you the exact same thing every single time. And then something that you had said too, these attitude meetings where you said like if there's a diamond within like a vicinity, like you're encouraged to go. That was us with the crown guy. I don't name him purely because I don't respect him. But if he was within 6 hours, our upline was like, you need to be there. I'm like,
That's
okay.
6 hours. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, oh yeah. I remember I the club owner who would become my upline diamond, he would tell us because we're all from Portland or Vancouver, same concept. And he would say that he saw the crown speak more in like Bellevue, Washington, or in Spokane than he did locally in Portland because he was
Mhm.
driving the miles. So of course, we were also encouraged to drive the miles, which also adds up, right? Like all this gas money that you're spending, and with the apps, that didn't include the book cost, did it? And how much like were they encouraging you to buy books?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, they encouraged like you could buy a book from anywhere, of course, but they wanted you to buy books from the LTD store particularly. And of course, I didn't know this before, but in hindsight, it's like, oh, they get a kickback off that, so they want you to buy it from there. But you could very easily buy these books from Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatnot. But they really want you to do everything through their marketplace just so they can get that as well. So it all adds up. They're all kind of taking money from the same system, and that's where all of your money is going between the Amway piece and the LTD piece. Like that's your monthly costs are insane.
Right. Wow. That is insane. But of course, like I said, like you're when you're in it, it just makes sense because you're bettering your life. You are on your way to being free from a traditional job. You're probably encouraged to, want to free your parents or at least, pay off their debt. Like there's so much riding on this. So like the reason why we spent all this money, if you guys have never been a part of these organizations, is because we really believed in the dream. And ultimately these things were going to get us free. So while you were in the business, what was your honeymoon phase like? Like, about how long was it, and what were some of your favorite moments?
I think, especially for me, the self-improvement piece stood out so much because you're reading these books that you may or may not be reading normally. You're around these positive people. And I think for me, the honeymoon phase was just that feeling where it's like, wow, I'm really going somewhere in life. Like I'm around all these successful people. I'm just always positive, and I felt like I was in this mental state where I did not want to hear anything remotely resembling a complaint or anything like that. Like I just wanted to be straight up positive. I would always listen to audios when I'm driving. So I was just there's this almost emotional high to it, even though you're not really making any money, but you just feel really good. And that that lasts for a while. I think what starts to break that is when, at least for me, you're going through, doing what they want you to do, and you're not really getting results. And that's where it starts to hit you a little bit because you're thinking, okay, you're trying to, especially when it comes to things like sponsoring members to your team, you're out there, you're reaching out, you're not really getting good feedback, you're getting a lot of rejection. And for a while, I think, especially for the first year, there was a ton of rejection, but I felt like, okay, I can just keep pushing through it, pushing through it, pushing through it. Saw a little bit of results. I know for myself, I didn't actually sponsor anybody for the first about 8 months. And that was just as a result of, went through your friends and family. And I'm thinking, man, like, is it something I said or is there something wrong with me? And it's like, okay, just keep pushing, keep pushing. And the first person I sponsored was somebody I met at a networking event in DC. And we're talking about cryptocurrency. And then I ended up sponsoring him and his wife onto the team. So that was crazy how that worked out. But it was just one of those, like, yeah, if I keep pushing through all this noise and static, I'll eventually get the result that I want. But that doesn't last but so long until you start to feel a little bit of that fatigue. So there's that. Otherwise, I think it's the same thing with product sales. Like I'm like, wow. So I don't drink energy drinks much at all. Like I might drink an occasional Celsius, but I don't really touch them. But I'm trying out, excess things like that. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. You walk into work with your excess, hope somebody notices that, so they might buy a case or something. But again, that lasts for a little bit, but it just, you start seeing the cracks show a bit, and that's where that phase, the honeymoon phase, starts to wear off a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting when you're kind of getting what they call momentum, right? Where you're talking to people, people are seeming interested, and then you do your sponsor your first person. And it's a high. I feel like you live off that high for a little while. You're getting gratification for sponsoring someone, you have a guest, and then because you have people on your team, it also shows other guests that you bring around that you're successful, which is amazing. Like that high, I feel like very few things have at this point in my life reached that point, with the exception of
Mhm.
like having my children. Um, but it's because they place so much emphasis on it, which is really interesting kind of looking back. Um, and when you're talking about the cracks and you're seeing the fact that you're not having this progress the way that they kind of explain, right? It's a 2 to 5 year plan where you're supposed to
Right.
be able to, right? You're supposed to be able to go diamond in 2 to 5 years. In your first year, when you're not at that double eagle place that they claim that you should be at your first year, it does start to feel like, wait a minute, like I'm the one who's wrong. It couldn't possibly be the business. It's me. It's something I'm doing. I need to ramp up, or I need to read more books or listen to more audios. And what were some of the first red flags that you really started to notice?
So one of the things that got me immediately was the customer volume piece, and where it's like, okay, you want to show your products in front of people, your friends, family, work, and they're supposed to buy them. And then because you see folks come up on the stage like, yeah, my mom bought this or my coworker bought this, and you're like, man, people aren't buying things. Like, is it something wrong with me? And I'm just kind of thinking, but everybody's still putting their customer PV in anyway, and from the very first day, that sort of went in the back of my head. I'm like, okay, so you don't technically have to sell something. You just write it down as if you did. And Amway tried to crack down on that with verified customer sales, but there's loopholes around that too. You just have a person that you assign stuff to. So it's to me, it made me question how sustainable this really is if you're trying to get someone to legitimately buy stuff and there's no real training on how to do that. It's funny, it's called like multi-level marketing, but they're not teaching you anything about actual marketing. So it's just like pressure sales on everyone you know. Yeah, I think in particular, just how stressful it is to try to put that expectation on your personal network. Same thing with sponsoring. You're on Facebook messaging folks you haven't talked to since high school and you're like approaching 30. Like this is weird. And no matter how, I mean, it's weird to most people, but they would kind of gaslight you into thinking, oh no, this is normal, they'll be happy to hear from you. And I'm just like, no, I can see certain personal relationships just start cracking as well with that because even though I was friendly and nice, it's just like no one wants to be in that position where some guy you haven't talked to in a while reaches out to you and it's like, hey, I've got this business, and it's just like it just feels gross. And that was something I could never really get away from. Another thing that got me was in that same vein, just how there's no real training, like of sales, there's no real training for marketing, but for sponsoring, there's no real training on how to do that better. And they were kind of stuck in this Stone Age way of thinking. Like, honesty for us, even with the internet, they didn't like us really using the internet for contacting. They wanted you out there walking the aisles of Target, Barnes and Noble, just like standing there being creepy and hoping you see somebody in the self-improvement aisle going, hey, I see you're reading the 4 Hour Work Week. Would you like to have a 4 Hour work week in real life? Like stuff like that would just be so bizarre. And they wanted you to spend your evenings doing that. And for me, I noticed that that's not really possible to do if you have any life outside of Amway. I know when I say cracks in personal relationships, like I saw this with friendships, but also like I was dating someone at the time, and I noticed even with the business, like they positioned it in such a way that it's like, well, if you're in the business and you're dating somebody that's not in the business, like you shouldn't be doing that. It's like you're unequally yoked or whatever. And they just encroached on so much of your free time that you couldn't even really enjoy a date or something like that. And that killed me. I know one situation in particular, I'm like on a date and my upline knows I'm going to be out. So he's like, well, I know you got this goal for sponsoring this month. So while you're out, with your girl, whatever, like you should just get a few phone numbers. I'm like, who does that? Like you're out with somebody and you're supposed to be out there getting other phone numbers, contacting because like this business just takes up so much of your mental energy and time. Like that will really crush a relationship because just by that level of suffocation and like you being obsessed with the business all the time, it's so stressful. And I think like even though you're in that honeymoon phase at first, like that level of stress when you're out and about and you're always thinking, I've got to sponsor somebody. Like everyone you see out there has like a little targeting cursor around them. You're like, okay, that's a sharp person. Go talk to them. Like you can't live your life like that every single day and just not, get into that. Some other things I noticed too, and on the level of integrity, things like that. So we had different situations where you're trying to qualify platinum and your upline's about to go over that mark. You've got to be over 7,500 points, and a few situations where we're somewhat close, but the clock's approaching midnight that last day of the month, and it's like, okay, we don't have enough points. What do we do? And one particular instance, our upline kind of pops in, who's like, getting ready to go diamond, and he's like, well, I know that you guys aren't like super close yet, but what we can do is you have your ditto set up for the next month. Why don't you just push that back one day and buy everything at the last moment so we can get over? And we ended up doing that. But then you go, when that's being explained to the bigger team, it's like, man, like this is like an act of God. Like we got over, we didn't know how we are going to do it. And like me just watching it, I'm thinking like, you guys know that you're not right for that. Like you can't preach integrity like this, and you have to build the business a certain way, and then behind the scenes, you guys are fudging numbers or just using these different tactics or pressuring your downline to buy more stuff that they don't really need. So all that, like that was these were just certain things I saw that didn't really look right. A lot of far right dog whistles, especially when it came to conventions, or I mean, you're at an LTD conference, you're in the bookstore, you see these hoodies, and I see a hoodie that says something like "socialism sucks." I'm like, okay, I'm just here for a business conference. Like, we don't need to do all this. I'm at a attitude session, and there's like one really big upline who kind of goes in this mini rant about like abortion and LGBT rights, and I'm like, dude, again, why are you doing this? And one situation in particular, I don't even know what the guy was talking about necessarily, but he was talking about different demographics of people who succeeded or whatnot. And he didn't say like black or Hispanic explicitly, but he said, well, there's one demographic where like they don't have the fathers in the home as much. And I'm just sitting there going what is going on here? Like, and there's a decent amount of black folks in the audience at LTD conferences. I'm just wondering what they're thinking, sitting there going like, do you hear what's going on here? Like, I don't know how you can sit there and listen to that and like not get like a little concerned or upset, because if you're shooting for, diamond, emerald, whatever, like, are these the folks you really want to be around? Like, that made me think a lot. I'm like, I can't, yeah, I really can't get behind some of this stuff. So
Wow. Oh my God. I mean, everything that you said is a lot. That last part, though, like actually pisses me off so much. I mean, you're right. When it's not sustainable when you're fudging numbers. And that's kind of how so many organizations like they're reaching these levels, but then they're falling right off again. And they have to keep rebuilding their eagle ship or their double eagle ship. Or I think you guys had arrow, double arrow, something like that.
no, we had so what exactly is eagle?
Okay, good question. So, and this is for you and anybody else who's listening. So an eagle is 6 people wide who are doing the minimum standard, which at the time was 200 PV for a single, 300 for a couple, and a couple only counted as one because, of course, they were one business. Double eagle would be 12, but in each, I guess, individual eagle ship, you could have one prosumer, which was a person just buying the bare minimum of 200 PV.
Oh, okay. So that's with LTD, we had like not Eagle, but we had different markers that were considered roadmaps if you're trying to go diamond. So the first one for us would have
Okay.
been considered 310, where it's like you have 3 personal legs, but 10 people in your organization, and all those folks are going to a conference. So they all have their conference ticket locked and loaded. You'd have 310, you'd have 625, 650. 650 was like, okay, you're probably a platinum at that point, and then you had 12 100, which was like, this is when you're prepped up for diamond and whatnot. So those were like
Yeah.
those are the ones that were pushed for us in terms of just what they called getting your structure right. And
Got it.
they said they wanted you to be 12 wide as fast as possible. And that's like a pretty insane feat, because getting 12 legs at all is crazy. But then like having 12 legs at one time is like super insane. And I don't know how a lot of folks are expected to do that, because that's
Yeah.
especially when you're doing it the old fashioned way where you're out there contacting. Like, you'd have to be out there like a madman, just running the streets,
Right.
talking everything with a pulse, and hoping they get through
Exactly.
your 7 step process. So
Yeah, for real. No, seriously, it's hard. I mean, it's hard enough to sponsor one person, let alone 6, and then an additional 6. Like none of those things ever really seemed possible to me. I mean, sure, I was like, yeah, it's totally gonna happen. No, like that was never gonna happen for me. And I'm okay with that now, but they make you feel like a failure. But in terms of like you said, like doing the old fashioned way as well, it is hard when you're out there trying to have a conversation. I remember one of the guests that I've had, they said that their significant other was working at a grocery store in the cat aisle, and their conversation purely started because of cat food. And I was like, it really does happen like that. And just all of these different red flags. But the fact that you were seeing such hateful things on a large stage is so I mean, one, it's absurd, so absurd. But unfortunately, it's so common with these Amway organizations. There is actually, so Zay and Melody, they have a leaked Kate. I tell everybody go listen to it. It's a diamond telling one of his downline why he will not sponsor somebody who is gay. And it is the most just outrageous shit that I've ever heard in my life. Like, you try to tell the base level people, right? The people who are nowhere, that this is for everybody, right? Amway is, it's the American way and that's for everybody. But then you're starting to exclude people based on their race, their sexual orientation, like even their religion. Like just the fact that people are being discriminated against, but we're supposed to follow these people. And you're right, there is a very like right wing agenda. I remember I was in during the what was it? Maybe the 2018, no, 2016 election. And Lord help me, the amount of Kates I got. They were not explicit about who they would say, but they would say, they would say, vote for vote for your freedom. We all know who they were
That's
talking
exactly
about.
what they would tell us too. Like, because
Gross.
I was in 2018 to 2021, so of course the Trump re-election happened, and they never explicitly said vote for him, but I mean they may as well have said that with the way they were talking. I think
Yes.
my issue with the LBGT thing is because my thought was if I sponsor somebody who's they could be LBGT, they could be an atheist, they could be another religion, like how well would they fit into this culture where people are throwing out these again far right dog whistles and you sponsor somebody who's gay and like they're probably uncomfortable with what they're hearing and it's like if you want to have an environment that's for everybody, you have to truly make it for everybody. You can't have things
Yeah.
like we're going to pretty much turn conferences into church services or things like that. Like, if this is supposed to be about the business, like, let's make it about the business and not this separate agenda. But I think knowing what I know now about Amway and just their own political baggage, it's like, okay, this kind of comes with the territory, but they market it as if that's not the case. And that to me is like super slimy how that works out.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's so frustrating because they just do it so plainly and a lot of people will just ignore it. There's quite a few people that I've had who were either LGBT themselves or like a lot of people of color. Like I had this one girl on Jackie, she was telling me about how like they were really really just heavily racist towards Hispanic people. And she's like, I'm a Hispanic person. Like, how am I not supposed to take that offensively? And I just couldn't believe the things that she was saying. And then I have other people like Nandi, who she's like, I experienced so much racism, which is crazy. And even still, like, seeing the fact that she's like, I didn't see anybody who looked like me on stage. She's like, there was really nobody there that I could identify with. There was one person, and that was she is a Jamaican leader. And they were once, I think she said that like once she kind of saw what was going on behind closed doors, she's like, I can't even idolize her. It's so frustrating how like with the word exclusive, like the
Yeah.
best word, like
Yeah.
people
Because
are
when
being
I,
excluded.
the last big conference I went to, which was Summit, and there were like a decent number of new diamonds getting recognized. And in particular, you had like the first black couple who was a diamond. And I mean, it's like on one hand, you're happy for them, but the way some of the other diamonds spoke, it just had this undertone of you're one of the good ones. And that I kind of felt that like matter of fact, because one diamond even introduced the whole situation as like, yeah, this is LTD's like Jackie Robinson, where he's like the first one. And I'm just like, this is so like
What?
uncomfortably pandering. I don't know how to describe it. Just like you can kind of feel when someone's like they have you up there as like a prop. And that was kind of the vibe that I got from the way he described it. It's like if he's the first black one, that's great, but like don't introduce him like this is my black best friend kind of energy, you know? And that was how it felt listening to that. I'm like, okay, okay.
Yeah, like the token person.
Yeah,
They did that
exactly.
a lot in worldwide too. Like I would have loved to believe that my upline was all very diverse. I mean, we had so many different cultures. And one thing that this girl Jada that I had on, she said she's like, they're all different shades of the same color. There we go. She's like, it doesn't matter. She's like, I can see somebody who I can identify with, but they are still acting the same way as the agenda that's being pushed by everybody else. And I was like, whoa, like that is so true.
Yeah,
And I
I'm thinking
did,
like it's almost like a whitewash in a sense, where it's like
yes.
they
Yeah.
all kind of have that like polished kind of thing going on where like, okay, like yeah, you might be a different ethnicity, but you're kind of using the same lingo. You don't really sound like you're being true to yourself. It's just like you just wipe this coat of paint over it and say, okay, like they're one of ours. Like they're a safe one, you know? So,
Yes. It's so crazy. My upline, he was praised for cutting his locks. Like that was the biggest thing. I mean, we heard that story all the time. Like, I did it. What's your excuse? And it's like, maybe you wanted to give up your personhood for these people, but that doesn't mean you can sit there and tell other people that they have to. And I just think that the issue of racism and bigotry with Worldwide is or not just with Worldwide, with all of these Amway organizations, because it's a common theme throughout everyone that I've talked to from now 4 different organizations. And I, like, if there's one thing I want people to take away is the fact that these organizations are hateful. Like, true down to the bare bones of it, there's a lot of hateful people. And these are, like you said, it's supposed to be a damn business meeting. And like you said previously, you didn't learn about sales and you didn't learn
right.
how to contact.
You actually just unlocked a memory when you mentioned the dreadlocks thing.
Well,
So
okay.
again, I remember how much my dad was in Quickstar back in like again early 2000s or whatnot. So I have this one memory where my dad had like a mustache for a while, and he shaved it off. And what I found out later on was that a certain high up leader in his organization was like against having facial hair, and so everyone else did it to look like him. And I didn't know because I was like, so later on in life, I was like, so is that why you cut your? And he was like, yeah, because a lot of people were doing it to mimic this particular leader. And I'm like, wow, that's it's crazy because they're like, well, if I cut my hair like him, maybe I'll be more successful. And there's so much of that in Amway where people will do anything to get as close as possible to their upline, to look as close as possible to their upline, just to somehow that will translate over to them getting the exact results that they're getting. And it's honestly the most like bizarre form of hero worship I've seen, especially from like grown adults. Like at some of these conferences, you'll see somebody who's a high pin level, and people like all the IBOs in the room will swarm this one person, and they'll just like they got their notepads out. They're going like, "Yeah, this guy's talking. I'm getting around the heat," and they're really just saying stuff that they probably either read in the book or they heard in audio, but like because it's coming from somebody live and in person, it's like treated like this is gospel. And yeah, it's from the outside looking in, it's one of the most bizarre things you'll ever see. Just even at concerts, I've never seen people like that. Like just to hear somebody talk, I'm like, okay, it's not that serious,
Oh,
guys.
yeah.
But that's how
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is.
They're hoping that they breathe a little bit of their success onto them. Like,
Yeah.
it's now that you're starting to kind of open your eyes to all these red flags, like, what is it that did you in? What were you like, you know what? I have had enough.
I had man, I had like a the way I describe it is it wasn't just one thing, it was death by a thousand cuts. And
Got it.
certain things just I mentioned the qualification incident, just part of it was me being mentally exhausted. Some other things that happen when you're out like contacting just really cement that I shouldn't be doing this long term. So this reaction didn't happen until a few months after I left, but during COVID, of course, obviously you can't go outside, you can't contact folks the old-fashioned way. So what a lot of us were doing was just jumping on LinkedIn and trying to do it that way. My strategy was I would connect with people that went to the same university as me. I jump in the DM, say, hey, great to connect with somebody who's also, alumni of this college. And the conversation would start really well. And then from there, I just kind of, you know, little back and forth, and then just drop the message that way. Um, Again, nobody actually got in that way, but you make some connections, things like that. But one person in particular, this was one of the most bizarre moments of my life. I messaged a bunch of folks. I was sending about maybe 10 messages per day or so. And one night I get this phone call from this guy, and it's from a blocked number, and he leaves this super angry voicemail. I still have it, by the way, but he's pretty much like cussing me out over the phone because he thinks that I'm hitting on his wife, and
Oh
he's
no.
like, "Man, what you doing is really corny. You talking to my wife on LinkedIn, and like you slide in her DMs, and like, no, I just sent a hi, how are you doing? Whatever, like I do to everybody else. But this guy's like threatening me over me jumping in his DMs, like, yeah, I'm going to be in your city, whatever. I'm just like, this is not like, this is not how you do business long term. Um, really seeing those interactions after you're out is crazy. Like my girlfriend now, she was at Target and she was looking at something and a girl walks up to her and just compliments her shoes. They start talking, exchange numbers. And she's talking to me and she's like, I can't tell what this girl wants with me because like, she's talked to me a few times, like we met at Target, but I don't know why she messages me. And I'm like, I'll bet money that she's an Amway. And like just because the way she described it, I'm in my head, I'm thinking like, man, that was a perfect contact. Like that's good technique. I mean, she got a phone number, she's contacting you, but if you're not in the know, like you don't know that this person's not trying to be your friend for real. It's just
Right.
that's what they do. They just kind of feign friendship, go from there. See other things that kind of rub me the wrong way. Towards the end of 2021, again, this was like COVID's still kind of happening, so all of our functions were online, and we're still paying for them, by the way. Like you're paying to be on a Zoom call, which is ridiculous in its own right. But for this particular meeting, if you had three legs, or if you added three legs on your team, you could actually go in person, and that was like their kind of bait. It's like, hey, if you meet this qualification, you can show up in person as well, and you can be on the camera, whatever. So of course, I'm messaging my guts out on LinkedIn trying to get somebody in, but nobody got in through all my phone calls or whatever. And so I'm just watching this thing on Zoom at home. And one of the like head diamonds, she's like, well, if you didn't have three folks down here, you didn't care enough to be here. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like actually angry because I've been like working super hard and like for you to just sit there and tell me that I wasn't trying hard enough because I didn't manage to get somebody on my team. Like to me, that felt super insulting. Like, why would you say that to folks that are actively working extra time of their lives? They already have jobs, they have this and that. And these people are spending their free time trying to build this business. And you just like step on their toes like that. Like for me, I just like no, I would that actually got me like lit fired up in a bad way because I was like how dare you say that, And I just couldn't do that. And between that and some other experiences reaching out to old friends and like a couple of folks I reached out to and I got blocked and I was like, geez, like you're texting somebody like 1 minute they're meeting your upline, the next minute that blue text bubble turns green. I'm like, oh geez, like this is actually wrecking my personal relationships and I can't keep doing this because it just isn't sustainable long term. I don't want to be out there with an agenda every time I'm meeting a new person. I just want to actually make friends again. So I think all of that led down the path of me just like, okay, I can't keep doing this. And of course, I'm spending so much money. Like that's a big one. So
Yeah. Wow. I think you're absolutely right when you're like it's so bad for your relationships, which is also bad for your mental health. Like
hmm,
they really do like want basically all of these people to be like your end all be all. That's your mom, that's your dad, that's your sister, that's your best friends. You're gonna travel the beaches of the world with them. Like at the end, I want to say that I lost quite a few friends while
hmm,
I was in because same thing, like I was getting blocked. It was like, wait, we're not interested in your pyramid scheme. I'm like, it's not a pyramid scheme. And then by the end, I'm like, no, you're right. But like, it's really sad the way that they isolate us as humans. And they really do follow so many of the tactics that are on Stephen Hassan's bite model.
hmm,
And I heavily encourage every single person, if you guys have not looked up the bite model, it's freedomofmind.com. It's behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. These are all of the different things that cults will commonly do to keep you involved and keep you invested. And do you now have a different view of the kind of the self-development aspect of it, being as it was more of like indoctrination?
Yeah, I'm still a little conflicted because I legitimately do think there were some positives I took out of it. Like as I am right now, I'm a lot better at talking to folks, but I think because now that I'm not in Amway, like I don't have this agenda of, hey, I can, I'm talking to you, but I want to get your phone number so I can DTM you and post in my group chat that, hey, I DTM this guy I met at the gym or whatever. But now I just feel a lot more relaxed about things like that. I think some of the books are okay in terms of personal development. There's a couple that I like a lot, but like Atomic Habits was one that they had in the store that I think is a really good book that holds up even outside of a business perspective. But some of them were a bit toxic. Like to me, I don't think Think and Grow Rich is that good of a book at all. Like looking back on it, I'm like, this isn't. You can't really take much from this. I think How to Win Friends and Influence People is okay if you're not using it in that way. I think if you're using it to
Yeah.
be genuinely interested in other people, I think it's useful. But if you're faking it just to get better business results, I don't think that's a healthy way of approaching it. Because kind of coming out of all this, one thing that got me was realizing how, I mean, there are some folks that I'm still on good terms with, we're still cool, but in other cases, like some folks that, I was cool with anyway, like once you leave, it's like you're nothing. One case in particular, again, my girlfriend and I were out at a restaurant and we're about to leave, and I look at the bar and I see like a cross line I knew. Like this guy and his wife were sitting there and we were pretty cool. So I'm thinking, yeah, I saw this guy at info sessions every week. I'll go say hi. So kind of look over at him, just wait for him to make eye contact, do the friendly, black guy head nod thing. And he like looks at me and then looks immediately away. And I'm thinking, maybe he didn't recognize me. And I kind of turned to my girlfriend and like, I was like, maybe he didn't recognize me. I'll go over and say hi. And then she was like, no, he looked dead at us and looked away. And I was like, okay, I guess we'll just leave the restaurant then. And like that, it kind of hit me that I'm like, man, a lot of these friendships, again, not all of them, but a lot of these friendships are fake. And the second you leave the cult, like you're nothing. And like you're that shunning. Like I'd never experienced that kind of shunning, especially in person. Like that was just like one of the coldest things I've seen in my life. I'm like, wow, that confirmed my decision to leave. I'm like, yeah, or rather, that confirmed why I left. I'm like, yeah, if that's how you guys treat folks, you're in there talking about Jesus or whatever, but the second somebody leaves and you're just gonna act like they don't exist at all, like I want nothing to do with this organization. Like even if like I would never go back, obviously, but if I was thinking about going back and that happened, like that would have changed my mind. I'm like, okay, well, I'm definitely not going back now if I see how you really are, outside of all that. So yeah, that after seeing all that, I'm like, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Like, but it's true. It happens. I have not had the privilege of running into any old cross line. I've like reached out to some. Some people I'm not sure if they're still in. And then there's others who are still in and they know that I do this. And they wanted to be friends with me. And now then they've since ghosted me. And like I'm okay with that because I mean, it is what it is. I feel bad for them. They're still so brainwashed that they don't know better. But I do also think that once you've been in for a certain amount of time and you've reached a certain pin level, I feel like you kind of know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
actually, speaking of that, were you aware that and I don't know for LTD if it's the same, but I know for worldwide, platinums and above are getting paid on the business tools. I don't know what pin level it is for LTD, but did you know that your upline was getting paid on your business tools? Were they transparent about that?
Initially, no. And that's one thing that, again, in hindsight, they don't tell you that when they're showing me the business plan. They don't say this money you're making is going to come from LTD. Like you're just thinking, okay, diamonds are getting paid this much money, etc. There was one audio where a guy mentioned it in passing, where he said something along the lines of, once you hit platinum, you get a little kickback. But they didn't say that it was from the tools or whatnot. It's just like LTD pays you for something. And knowing what I know now, I know platinums make a certain amount, emeralds make a little bit more, diamonds make a lot more. But the actual Amway checks aren't that great. And matter of fact, I know folks that are in other MLMs, and I mean, I'm not pro MLM at all, but the money they're making from their companies is like smoking what Amway pays so little in the overall like MLM space that it's crazy. And in Amway, they have you thinking that, yeah, this is the best MLM ever, and we're number one and all this, but like they aren't really getting paid the way they say they're getting paid. So
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I'm also very anti MLM, which I feel like I make very clear. But I do have a friend who had spent time in different MLMs and she was making decent money in it. Like, and there was no tools. Like it was purely just that specific company that they were
Mm,
doing. And I think that you make a really good point that kind of opens my eyes like, dang, like there really are other MLMs I don't support by any means,
right.
but it kind of really makes what all these other people said BS because this is not the end all be all, nor is it the best thing in the world. And now that you're out, what is life looking like now?
Yeah. So I mean, kind of on that point, I did spend a little bit of time in another MLM for less than a year after Amway because I was like, okay, let me try something different that doesn't, use that system. And they have their own issues as well. And I ended up leaving just the MLM space entirely. But
Interesting.
it's you kind of learn a lot of things about like how Amway's kind of stuck in the Stone Age in their own way. And again, like you said, there was no tool system. Like if I was spending money on anything, it was just my own products, but that was it. Like you
Yeah.
only had one conference instead of like 500. So just like things like that. But I kind of left. I'm like, yeah, this still doesn't really pan out the way that, you know, they make it sound. But at least I was able to make that comparison for myself. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just kind of
Yeah.
stick with my own career. But in terms of my own life, I mean, things are going well. Relationships are great. Actually, my career's at like the best place it's ever been right now. So started making a lot more, just kind of moving up in my own like IT career, and that's been a super helpful. And like it's funny now where I am now. Once you hit a certain point, like you're almost in a place where Amway couldn't hook you because you kind of got what you want already. So Amway paints jobs as these like awful thing, like, oh, 9 to 5s are terrible and all this. I'm like, no, I actually like my job. Like I have no desire to, that power fantasy of retiring early. I'm like, no, I'm actually cool. What I did realize during COVID was I don't think jobs are the negative part. I hate commuting. Like, yeah, staying home all day or whatever. Like, yeah, I'd rather not sit in traffic in DC. It's awful. But in terms of just doing something you enjoy and having time freedom, like you can honestly get that with a remote job. You don't need to join Amway and join a whole cult to do that. Just find something you like, see if the schedule's flexible, and yeah, you'll really get a lot of those benefits that people in groups like Amway claim that jobs won't give you. The amount of folks I know that were in Amway and had to quit their job and go back is like crazy. It's like
Yes.
you can't preach that like jobs suck and then like you're like, oh well, one of my platinum legs filed a qualification, so I got to go get another job. It's just like, come on.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I just learned this about one of my upline. I was there for his retirement party. They had him smash the stupid alarm clock. Him and his kids were all in like superhero capes and shit, and like, oh, he's the greatest thing in the world. Well, him and one of his downline platinums had to get jobs, which is so funny because it's like, do you have a second retirement party? Like, how does this work? Funny enough. And then I was Googling his wife because I was like, I want, like, I found his LinkedIn. They always praise these people like, well, these CPA accountants came in and they were making $200,000 a year. Like, if they can see it, why can't you see it working minimum wage? The guy was only a CPA for like 6 months. Like, he only worked for this company for 6 months. And I was like, why did I never look at these people's LinkedIn? Why did I trust their word? But I looked up his wife and while doing so, I found their business that one of their other platinum legs is registered in as well. And I was also at his retirement party. So, and
Wow.
they do like overhead coverings or something. And somebody mentioned that allegedly it could be a way of money laundering, which alleged, personal opinion, probably a joke. But either way, is Amway not doing well enough to the point where you have to own an outside business when you tell us? They really did. They one of my upline um, so my upline's kind of strange, but basically my who would become my platinums, they were sponsored by their son and daughter-in-law. Well, the daughter-in-law's parents eventually got in the business. They encouraged these people to like get rid of their $1 million like actual cleaning business. Like they were really successful, well known in the area that they were in. Thankfully, they do still own it. At least I looked it up. But they're preaching this to other people and yet they're doing it themselves on the side. It's disgusting. But it's the things you find out after you leave, right?
Yeah, I mean, even in that, I know folks who have actually like pulled money out of their 401k to like support their Amway business. So it's like, and my thing is like, if you're building this business, you need money to come in like to support that. So people who just jump ship and they say, hey, I'm just going to do this full time, like you're really going to leave this, you're going to leave your health, you have no health care at this point because you left your job. You have like no 401k savings, different kinds of insurance, and you're going to put all that into like this Amway business that does nothing. Now, I will say, like, throughout my time in the business, I definitely spent way more than I should have. I kind of racked up a little bit of debt, which I've paid off now. But one thing I'm glad that I was at least encouraged to do was like do my taxes thoroughly, because like if you're gonna like lose all this money in Amway, like at least follow that, because otherwise, like yeah, that'd be messy if you didn't follow that. Because when you like do the math for like how much money you spend in Amway, like they send you like your tax forms and all that. I'm like, wow, I spent this much on Ditto, and then it's not counting into my money I'm spending in LTD. We were encouraged to like write down our miles and stuff, but like yeah, I'll say if like you're currently in Amway and you're going to leave or something, like just make sure you like keep records of everything, because yeah, don't miss out on that, because you're spending so much money on that, and like the IRS is like, dude, what are you doing? So yeah.
Dang. That's really, really solid advice, actually. Thank you for adding that because I was not one of those responsible people who learned how to do my taxes the right way. And I definitely like really missed out on this opportunity that I'm learning how to do now that I'm trying to run my own business.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I'm really excited and I'm so glad to hear that your life is like exponentially better since you have left Amway, that your relationships are solid now and you're in this point in your career where you actually feel like you don't need something like Amway to come to you, which is amazing. Are there any last words of wisdom that you have for our listeners?
Yeah, I don't like to tell people what to do, but if you're in the business, just like do your research. I know when you're in, they're like, yeah, the internet says everything, but like truly do research. But I think my biggest lesson over the past few years is like really trust your own gut. Because when I was again looking at this business for the first time, I was like, oh, it's kind of shady. I know my dad kind of gave his endorsement, but like really just really trust your gut and don't let someone else tell you what to think. Like if you have an inkling, if you're questioning something, like don't just let it sit there. Don't just like bury it. Like, well, I'm a big fan of journaling. So if you're gonna like have these questions, write it out, ask people about it, talk to people that have been in the business as well. Like keep all that in mind, and yeah, don't don't quit your day job. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I know a lot of people are going to be so grateful for you and sharing your experiences with LTD. If you guys want to be like Steven and you guys want to share your story, please email me at Dani, DANI, at exesandtpodcast.com. You are still welcome to DM me on Instagram at exesandt.podcast. You guys can find me on TikTok at the same handle and everywhere podcasts are heard. We will catch you guys in the next episode.